We're back with another video in our 900 rebuild series. This summer, we're taking apart the engine on my 1988 Saab 900 Turbo, pretty much doing a full rebuild on it in hopes to solve a few issues it has. If you guys missed the past few videos in this series, please check them out on my channel. But today, as the title suggests, we're going to be doing a lot of work to help make this massive pile of garbage look a bit better. If you're following me on Instagram, you probably saw a post I made recently asking for all of your opinions on what sort of colors I should go with. I was set on two in particular, one being black and another being silver. I want to restore a lot of things to black and silver as they were, but I also wanted to add a touch of a third color, which we'll reveal later in the video. This is going to be a very dirty and gross job. I did clean a lot of stuff last year. The block and things like that did not get a super detailed clean. I think I want to start with this because it's sort of the biggest piece here. And well, I've already bothered to roll it out from the corner back there. So I think we're gonna go ahead and start by trying to clean off this mating surface here and the mating surface underneath. And then we can go ahead and start masking off for actual spraying and cleaning of the part we're gonna paint. I don't want degreaser getting into the cylinder walls or down in here because I still have the crank connected. So I'm just going to spray some degreaser on the rag. This is going to take quite a while. So thankfully with the magic of editing, we can skip all that. It's about an hour and a half later, and well, it might not look a whole lot different. I was hoping to get this completely clean of all black spots or anything. It is certainly much smoother, and I think just about ready for when we need to apply the head gasket at a later date. So I'm pretty happy with that. In retrospect, this is definitely the most time-consuming thing I think I need to clean, at the risk of jinxing myself. So now let's flip it over and clean this side. Good news is this was super easy and simple to clean off. Bad news was this timing cover right here was much less fun. So I've got 3 out of the 4 sides cleaned. This 4th side I think I'm gonna have to wait on. We'll deal with this once we're ready to take the engine off the stand. But I think our next step is to basically mask off everything I just cleaned. Everything is masked off. Let's blast this thing with some degreaser.
Nothing in the world could ever be good again. I've been nothing but a girl who really should be nothing less. Don't mess up and don't you tell us so how you actually feel.
Gotta be honest, I thought this whole thing would look much more silver when I was done wiping it off, but I think it's just discoloration from over the years. You can see it's more brown and stuff up here, so it could definitely benefit from a repaint. I went ahead and also took off this motor mount over here that was on there. And yeah, let's move to the other side.
Then they'll cut you right at the heel, and it hurts. No one can save you. It's all on your mind to change too. And baby, you can really try if you climb your way up. Do it on your own and you should.
You might be noticing I'm leaving the oil filter housing on here for one, and secondly, this little piece, I believe this is the engine block coolant drain. I'm fine with this being black versus silver. I figure it's not worth pulling it off and replacing the gasket just to paint it silver. I am obviously going to leave the oil filter on here too, since this is going to get replaced, so who cares if it gets painted black. A lot of the older Saab engines came with different colored engine blocks, which is really cool. And that's kind of one of the things I was hoping to find out with this car, but it does look like it came with most likely this silver or either black when it was new, but some older ones had things like red, teal, or, you know, other random cool colors like green.
'Cause you're gonna get burned. Yeah, you're gonna get burned.
We're supposed to wait 10 minutes between coats. We're probably gonna do 3 coats total, so I'll catch up with you guys when I'm all done with 3 coats. 3 coats are done, and I would say this turned out pretty good. So I'm overall super happy with this. We gotta let it dry before we can peel everything off, but in the meantime, what I'm working on is this motor mount and all the brackets that were sitting right here because it's absolutely caked in oil. You can see how just a little bit of cleaning can go a long way. Now these, and pretty much any part that's painted in this color, I think it's just zinc plated, is going to remain because I think it's kind of a cool accent color. Like this right here, I'll probably just clean up and leave as is.
You should never roll all the dice without a hand. It's make or break when you never did stand a chance. Tell me, Saab, don't you tell us so how you actually feel. If you do, then they'll got you right at the heel, and it hurts. No one can save you. It's all on your mind to change too. And baby, you can really try if you climb your way up. Do it on your own when you're shit out of luck. Nobody will help if you're flying too close to the sun. 'Cause you're gonna get burned. Yeah, you're gonna get burned. Burned. Yeah, you're gonna get burned. You know that you control me. Guilty self-affliction. Prey on me when I'm lonely. But now I'm your willing victim. My friends already told me, but I don't wanna listen. 'Cause I love the way you hold me. And I don't need a reason.
I've got the lower timing cover and the oil pump housing all cleaned up. I put the oil pump housing onto here because everything behind here is just mating surfaces that I want to protect anyway, so I just have it resting on here. And I also have the old water pump. We're going to be putting a new water pump on, but I have the old one just sitting on here just to once again cover up the mating surfaces. And then we've done some masking on other places where different parts will connect to it. And you're doing it by hand. This takes a super long time. I probably spent about 2 hours at least on this, and I still have some stuff to get in here, but it should be good enough. What we're going to do is paint the front of this part you're gonna see in our third mystery color, and the piece on the back will be black. So for now, I'm not gonna paint this side. I just wanna get it all prepped. And on the back side, I'm not gonna completely strip it down since we're just gonna do black again. You're not gonna be able to see it. So I'm just going over the back side with 60 grit and this side with 180 and then 600 to get it a little bit smoother before we paint.
La la la, lonely, la la la, lonely, la la la, lonely. I don't want excuses, just so I can justify the empty and it's useless. I tell myself another lie, 'cause I don't wanna be.
Let's get these few miscellaneous brackets and pieces cleaned up next. After reinstalling the engine mount back onto the block and seeing how it didn't look that great, in all honesty, after being cleaned up, kind of had a thought in the back of my mind for the past few days. Should I paint all this stuff? Should I get it re-zinc plated? Should I paint it a different color? Should I leave it as is? And I really didn't want to leave it as is because, as you can tell, a lot of these, even with all this cleaning with heavy degreaser, still either has a bunch of marks on it. Some of it is a lot more reflective than others, whereas if you look at this bracket for the compressor, it's basically silver at this point. So these all kind of came out in varying degrees. Like that one still looks pretty good. But I decided zinc plating all this stuff is probably gonna cost me almost $300. I didn't want to spend that much money on something like this. So what I'm gonna do instead is paint it. I bought caliper paint instead of just regular engine paint because I do really like this gold, and who knows, maybe in the future I'll use this same paint to paint the calipers on one of the cars. That's for a future video. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. But this is just some more VHT. This is gold. This is not our third color, but let's get to spraying. We got one more coat to do on this probably, and then we'll let it dry for about 3 hours and flip it over and do the other side. Let's get this thing painted next. It cleaned up very, very nicely, way better than anything else I've cleaned so far. I'm gonna leave the main seal in there because I have a new one to replace it, so it being in there is just gonna perfectly mask off the mating surface. While we wait for everything to dry, let's go ahead and start on cleaning the engine bay. I did a full video on this. You can check that out in the top corner last year when I did the manual swap. And thankfully it's only been a year, so the engine bay, relatively speaking, is almost spotless. There's still tons of crap I need to clean out. But before we do that, let's remove the downpipe. I'll spare you guys another time lapse. Well, actually ended up taking about 2 hours. I thought it would take maybe 45 minutes, but we've got it all cleaned up. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Still not perfect, but I got as much clean as I could. I went ahead, cleaned the steering rack down here, the shift linkage, all these hoses and lines all over the place. So it's about as clean as it's gonna get without being repainted, which I'm not gonna be doing. So pretty happy with that. All the brackets have been flipped. Now let's paint the opposite side. All of our miscellaneous brackets are done. Our timing cover is done. And they all look super good. Next, let's get started on the exhaust. So we have our VHT exhaust paint. So you can see this is specifically very high temperature flame proof, rated up to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. So this should do the job just fine here. Essentially what I've done is I put every bracket and manifold, everything upside down right now. I'm gonna paint the underside first. That goes for the downpipe as well. And then in the morning, we'll flip it over and do the other side. So this color I'm going with here, I was debating between black and silver. We're just going with flat aluminum is what this is called. It's going to be a very similar color to these right here, I think. And once again, I'm going to do a couple more coats of this and we'll be done. I've teased you guys long enough. Let's reveal the fourth color. Before that though, I did just remember I picked up this bracket that goes between the transmission and the turbo. This is different manual to automatic. I never got one last year, so I'm gonna clean this up. I think I'm gonna paint it gold because everything else in that area is gonna be silver, so I think gold would look really good to contrast with that a bit. But our fourth color, which we're going to be painting, starting off with our coil and spark plug cover, is red. I'm not going to be painting much in red, mainly the coil pack cover, maybe one or two of the charge pipes, and maybe the intake side of the turbo. I don't know, we'll see, but let's at least start with the coil pack cover because that thing was such a pain to prep and get ready. Super happy with this shade of red, how this turned out. I actually have even more parts I want to paint gold. I seem to keep finding little brackets and things that I want to paint gold. This one was initially a zinc plated one, as you can probably tell. Unfortunately, this bushing right here is, well, it's kind of completely shot. And as I was trying to clean it, I was being as careful as I could and I just made it worse. So I'm not sure where to find a new bushing like this. So I kind of just super glued it for the time being and we'll see how that goes. Thankfully this side is just fine. These are the two little covers and the clip that holds the cover on for the input shaft. And we can also paint the other side of this. Let's take a quick break to talk about this transmission. So, this transmission is obviously the junkyard transmission from last year. It was absolutely caked in oil, sludge, piss, God knows what else. And last year when we did the manual swap, I cleaned it up. And when I say cleaned it up, I really just spent like 15 minutes just trying to get some of the wet stuff off. And I knew that this was going to be an absolute nightmare to try to clean. I spent about an hour with this time lapse you're watching right now, trying to clean this thing off. In that hour, I got this fill plug cover right here cleaned off. Thankfully, my buddy Eric, big shout out to him. His work had an awesome parts washer. So I took the transmission there earlier today and we spent about an hour getting this thing cleaned up. And as you can see, it's looking pretty damn good. About as good as it's gonna get. So we spent about an hour with the parts washer and I just spent about another 45 minutes with some more degreaser on some of the rough spots and things like that. But I'm super happy with how this turned out. So without further ado, I gotta mask a few things off. Obviously this right here, both of the axle boots, and a couple other small miscellaneous items like the shift rod here and things like that. And then let's paint it. Before we paint this, and now that everything's masked off, the keen eye might have noticed when we were power washing this thing, I didn't have everything masked off to prevent water from getting inside the transmission. We were mostly concerned about the slave cylinder area up here and obviously down by the speedo cable here, but there's also a little hole right here where water can get into. So water did get in the transmission when I got home. I did a couple cycles of WD-40ing, taking that diff plate off right here. And then I obviously also drained it and filled it with oil, but this is all resealed. Everything's masked off. Let's get it painted. Got a lot of masking tape and things on the transmission. This was definitely the most time-consuming and tedious thing by far that we've done, but I'm pretty happy with the result. We've got our cylinder head back from the machine shop, and you can see they actually did a fantastic job degreasing it as well. It wasn't super bad before, but definitely had a lot of grease on it. We do need to go over it and clean up a few little spots all around. I also want to clean off all these mating surfaces. I just spent about 15 minutes getting all this old intake manifold off. This is looking really good. So let's clean this up next and get it ready to paint. I'm really impressed and happy with how the head not only cleaned up, but my masking job here, having to mask off the manifolds, was not too fun, but it's all ready to go. So let's get this thing painted. We also have some little miscellaneous brackets here. These two here, I keep telling myself I'm not gonna paint anything else gold, but you can tell this one is zinc plated, and this one's for the fuel pressure regulator. It also looks like it's zinc plated. So I'm gonna do both of these in gold, and then the rest we'll do in silver. Let's get the valve cover prepped. I'm gonna start by cleaning off this mating surface and getting rid of this old disgusting gasket that was leaking.
After all that we've been through, I think it's fair from me to you. Watch it burn.
You guys get the point. This is going to be tedious. I'll catch up with you all when this is clean. Getting this all cleaned out wasn't as bad as I expected. For most of it, especially all the stuff in these little corners, I used this pick. This is just a Harbor Freight pick. At first glance, this might look pretty good. It just seems like it's a little greasy up here and things like that, but there's just a lot of spots where the paint has just chipped over the years. Like here, right up there, back over there. This sticker I'm gonna take off because it's all, can't read it, it just looks ugly. So there's just a lot of spots that kind of just need to be refinished. So I'm not gonna do what I did with this cover and take it down to bare metal, because we're gonna be doing it in black. I don't really think that's 100% necessary. I mainly just wanna degrease it first because there's some grease on it. And then we'll do some light sanding and a little bit of prep. I'm hoping it won't be too bad, but let's see.
After all is said and done, and I know I am the one, I have waited here forever.
Let's get this thing painted. Essentially, we're gonna paint it with our black engine paint. I thought about doing a different color. I thought about doing wrinkle paint. I think I'm just gonna go with black since we're doing so many other bright colors and things on other parts of the engine bay. So we're just gonna paint everything, and after the paint cures, which is gonna take a few days, we'll come back with a sanding block and sand off all these raised surfaces. So it essentially in the end should just look like a much better version of what we have now. Valve cover is all done and dried, and it's not perfect. Like, there's a couple little spots that you can see where the old paint had chipped, but honestly it looks really good. I like that it's got a good glossy finish on it. We've also got all these little miscellaneous brackets for the intake manifold done. I redid the thermostat housing. Next we can move on to the turbo, which is going to be a bit of a pain just because there's so much going on. with this thing, but let's get started. We're gonna first take off the wastegate, the O2 sensor. Hopefully, I've been soaking it in PB Blaster, it still won't budge, but let's see. And all these return lines and vacuum lines. Gloves are pretty dirty, so I'm going to wipe it all down with Simple Green again. But take a look at how good this turned out right here. I'm super happy with it. I mean, this thing was like black before, so that all came off pretty easily. The exhaust side, similar to like when I did the downpipe and the headers, none of this stuff is really going to come off, so I'm more so just scrubbing it just to get any sort of loose stuff off of it. But let's spray it all down with Simple Green and figure out how the hell I'm gonna mask this thing off, and let's spray it. Got all 4 ports masked off. These are probably my best yet. I'm getting better as I do more of them here. And we also got the O2 sensor just taped up a bunch, and then I bagged and zip tied the actual wiring harness for it. And then over here I just kind of zip tied the best I could. If I get a little overspray of silver on here, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be more of a problem when I need to do the opposite and mask off this part. So that's going to be a future problem. But yeah, let's get to spraying this. Super excited with how this is going to turn out. I swear this is the last thing I'm painting gold. I promise. And it's only because it looks like it's zinc plated. Well, I think my masking job here with this plastic bag worked pretty well and zip tie. You can see back in there, I painted just about perfectly. So now we got to do the same thing except cover up the exhaust housing. Pretty satisfied with how this masking job went. Got those 3 holes and vacuum ports plugged, and then back here I decided to abandon the zip tie method and just went with some masking tape. It's only contacting the 4 ports that are already masked off, so it shouldn't be touching anything that's already painted, even though this did cure overnight. But let's get to spraying it. This is a good quick way to add about 50 horsepower to the car as well by painting this thing red. You carry the world upon your shoulders, for I'm not the only one. Give myself about a 9 out of 10 on the turbo. You can see I got a little bit of overspray on here and here. It was just so hard to mask that off. But overall, not too bad. I think what I'll do is just use a paintbrush to touch all that up over here and make it look better. But everything else, that's it, turned out perfectly. Super happy with how this all looks. It's been 3 days since I painted the turbo. I really want to clean up some of this overspray. It's mostly just like, this is the worst of it right here, and there's a tiny little red spot that somehow got right here. So I'm just going to spray some of the exhaust paint into the cap and then use a paintbrush to touch it up. The alternator has been all degreased and cleaned up. It was pretty bad looking before. I'll show you guys on the opposite side of the screen here what it looked like. So it's by no means perfect, but this is not going to be one of those things that I can really paint. All these blades right here are still pretty greasy and gross looking, but the rest of it cleaned up pretty well considering it was all black beforehand. I've gotten just about all the miscellaneous hoses and pipes cleaned up. You can see a lot of them are just the rubber hoses here. Pretty much all of them cleaned up really, really nice to the point where I don't need to paint any of the metal ones that are over here. There are a couple over here I do want to paint though. One of these is a turbo return line. You can see it's just got, this is all corrosion on here. This spot's pretty bad. And this one I think is fairly visible, so I'd like it to look extra nice. And same with this one. This is just a coolant line that runs kind of under the intake manifold. So I'm gonna mask these 2 off and let's get them painted.
behind now when everything is done. Oh, you carry the world that's on your shoulders.
Here we've got pretty much our last huge piece that we have to deal with, and that is the intake manifold. This piece right here has a lot of stuff that we need to take off of it. So let's get started with that. I'm gonna go ahead and take detailed pictures of everything, so that way when I put this back together, it all goes back on how it should. This right here is the flywheel cover that goes over the transmission. I thought this would clean up pretty well with just some simple green and a little bit of degreaser. As you can see, it still looks pretty bad. So I'm actually going to paint this thing so it looks a little bit better. The whole intake manifold, everything associated with it, all of its parts have been removed, degreased, cleaned, and we've basically got everything ready for paint here. Here's how this clutch cover turned out. I wanted to show you guys. Obviously still lots of imperfections just from it being scratched up, but at least the finish on it is good now. It's barely going to be visible anyways, but definitely looks way better. This is a little coolant sensor between two hoses right here. We got our fuel rail we're going to paint, so that's plugged and masked off. And we have our charge pipes here. And then this third charge pipe, I'm actually gonna paint just a flat black like I did for the clutch cover. And lastly up here, we have the intake manifold. I haven't shown much of the process for masking things off in this video, so this is probably gonna be just about the most tedious thing to mask off, just because there's so many little ports for vacuum lines, cooling lines, air lines, things like that. So I figured I'd at least show you guys what this process is like. So we're gonna mask this off and let's get the last of our parts painted.
Do you wanna stay the night? 'Cause I don't wanna be alone. It's been weighing on my mind for too long, too long. Save a life, 'cause I just really need someone. I've been barely holding on, and I'm still running from my demons. I'm still hiding all my secrets, and I just need someone I believe in.
Really happy with how this turned out, as always. So we're gonna let this cure, and I think doing the fuel rail in gold was kind of a last minute idea, and again, just another little thing I decided to paint gold. But that's all drying and curing, and then I painted that little charge pipe black over there. But now our valve cover has actually been curing for an entire week. I think it's time to take our sanding block here, where essentially our goal at least is to sand off all the paint on these raised edges. So that means all four of these lines here, the Saab, 16 valve, and then all four of the lines down here. I've only done this method once before and it worked fairly well when I used it on a different application. So I'm hoping it'll go smoothly here, but there's only one way to find out.
You know what to say every time I start to slip away. And I surrender, I surrender. There's no more falling down, I've hit the ground.
I've got this all sanded off, and honestly, I'd say I'm about 80% satisfied with this. A little bit disappointed. I did mess up just a bit on sanding. I have the flash on so that way you can really see it. So I'm gonna use a paintbrush and touch up these couple of areas right here, as well as make sure I can clean out all these little awkward holes. The other slight problem is this wasn't perfectly silver to begin with. So like actually on camera, it's coming up almost perfectly silver, but there are some like little black marks and grease marks in there. This is really exaggerated with the flash. It's not actually like white in there. So I'm gonna fix that, but I did wanna at least check and see how this looks. Yeah, that's gonna be pretty sweet sitting on top. So I'm gonna touch that up. We gotta let all this stuff dry. After touching up the valve cover, I realized I hadn't yet cleaned the distributor. I'll put a picture on the screen of what it looked like before. You can see it was just all kind of gross and almost corroded. Not bad enough to where I think it needs a repaint though. This is just with some extensive cleaning. I think it looks pretty solid. So this is all cleaned up and ready to go back in the car as well.
So I surrender. And I surrender. There's no more falling down. I've hit the ground. You don't owe me anything, but I believe that you can show me all the things that I've been needing. I'm just hoping you give me a reason to go on. And I'm still running from my demons. I'm still hiding all my secrets. And I just need someone I believe in. Will you wait for me while I'm still healing?
In front of me here, and well, also kind of behind me, are just a few of the parts we got cleaned up and painted in this video. There's just too much to kind of lay out here for the B-roll and the sake of this outro. But guys, I'd say overall, I am absolutely amazed with how well this turned out. This was 3 weekends of work to get this all done. So much time and effort went into this, and I think it's going to be worth it in the end. As you can tell, a couple of these items are actually already kind of starting to go back together, such as the turbo and some other little things in the engine bay. You guys will all see that in a future video. This should be just about the longest video I have ever made, and hopefully soon we'll be putting this thing back together. If only DHL would find my lost parts that are currently in Germany that should have been here a couple weeks ago. More on that and more repairs in a future video though. See y'all next time.